Let's start with this delightfully mid-90s overblown melodramatic movie trailer. In a world ruled by fear. Can't even do it. I'll let this guy do it.
In a world ruled by fear.
Judge Hawthorne has condemned 14 more people to the jail and promised hanging if they don't confess.
Confess? To what?
So yeah, we are talking about The Crucible. A quick shout out to my small group class of Edward, Jack, Jason, and Rahat, who are collectively, you're gonna hear that word a lot real soon, the most literarily minded group of young writers I've ever had the pleasure of tutoring. I assure you there have been some stunning pieces of writing produced out of that class, and none of it was thanks to me. On to the play. And yes, it is a play, even though I showed a movie trailer at the start. You might have even watched that movie if you do that text at your school, as a lot of teachers like to show film adaptations to give a better visual idea of a written play. However, be very careful because there are no visual techniques in The Crucible, because The Crucible is studied, at least in New South Wales, as a written text of Arthur Miller's original play manuscript.
The Crucible.
I have given you my soul. Leave me my name!
Directed by Nicholas Heitner. Screenplay by Arthur Miller.
So I'm taking a bit of a different approach today rather than my usual theme analysis. Because if you wanted the themes of the play, do you know where you can find that?
Where'd you learn to do this, Ricky?
The internet.
I mean, in your school notebooks, of course. Yeah, that's the place. So instead, I'll be talking about the 7 syllabus keywords from the module that this text resides in, the common module, Texts and Human Experiences. Wow, am I so sick of saying those words. Because you have to remember that even though The Crucible has been a play that has been taught and studied around the world forever, the fact that you will be analyzing it for the HSC means you kind of need to analyze it in the way that NESA wants you to analyze it. So today we'll be matching up the play's contents and themes, which you can find anywhere, to NESA's very specific syllabus requirements, which you might not be able to find anywhere. And the 7 syllabus keywords we'll be looking at today are... Before we start, I'll just quickly define all of them, even though for most of them, that's not really needed. They're pretty self-explanatory. Individual is for human experiences that happen to a singular person, and collective is for human experiences that happen to a group of people. Motivations are the thoughts, emotions, or desires that push someone towards a certain action. And this can be both from internal and external sources. And behavior is the actions that take place arising from those motivations, although they may not always be aligned. Anomaly is, broadly speaking, something that stands out, something that differs from the conventional or the accepted. Paradox, which is one of the trickier ones, and usually disguised in actual questions into other words such as complex or contradictory, and which in itself means either a mismatch between what appears as something on the surface but in reality is something else, or something that is self-contradictory by nature or unattainable by definition. And finally, inconsistency is a change or misalignment between things that ordinarily should be aligned, such as between behavior and motivation, the past and present, or even the individual and collective. Alright, with that out of the way, let's break down how those 7 keywords exist in The Crucible. And just a quick tip for the rest of you who may not do The Crucible, which might be most of you, this is something that I suggest you do for your assigned text for the common module. Even though your essays might be largely prepared by now, with your themes locked in and your pieces of evidence selected and your effects properly analyzed to go along with those pieces of evidence, you could still use small pieces of these keywords to slot into your body paragraphs as a process of refinement. Because you really can't go wrong with linking up your pre-existing analysis to one of these 7 NESA keywords. So just as I am breaking down The Crucible and how it fits these 7 ideas, you should also be thinking about how your school text can be deconstructed to demonstrate or support these 7 facets of the human experience. And they will be able to be matched up to all of them because NESA will have selected the texts specifically so that they include all of these elements that they are assessing you on. On to The Crucible. So the individual human experience is obviously the hanging of the alleged witches. They were hung one at a time, so that's individual. The collective human experience is obviously the group of girls dancing together naked in the park, as you do. They were doing it as a group, so that's collective. The standout motivation here is that crazed little girl Abigail's desire to get John Proctor back after their illicit affair. And the key behavior that arose out of that is obviously Proctor trying to keep her quiet about it. The anomaly of the play is obviously Tituba. She's the only one who's black. The paradox can be seen in the opening act of the play when Betty Paris appears to be sick but obviously was just faking. And the inconsistency comes from Proctor firing Abigail and hiring Mary Warren instead. Why not just stick to one maid? So yes, that was all trolling. For those of you new to my poor teaching, the premise is that half of it is outlandish lies with a fib indicator in every sentence that is clearly wrong. And today, that word was obviously. Fun fact, if you listen carefully, one of my poor teaching sentences did not have the word obvious in it, and that's because it was actually true. Alright, on to the actual teaching segment. Let's talk about all of these words as packages rather than standalone words, because they do come in two pairs and a triplet. Individual and collective are a pair, motivation and behavior are a pair, and anomaly, paradox, and inconsistency are not so much a connected triplet, but really should be slotted in at the opportunities where they best present themselves. So with the individual and collective human experiences here, the individual in terms of a noun of the play is John Proctor, the protagonist. But here's an important tip about using the word individual. Try to use it not as a noun, but as an adjective. So you want to avoid sentences like Proctor stands alone as the individual against the collective madness, and use sentences more like Proctor's individual sense of integrity and righteousness, however conflicted that might be for a large portion of the play, is contrasted against the town's collective lack of good judgment. Notice how I used individual and collective to describe human experiences and not as nouns such as the individual or the collective. And that is the more effective way to use them. Having mentioned the collective, you should also roll it together with the word hysteria. Just like you cannot properly analyze Othello without the word jealousy, and you cannot properly analyze Curious Instinct without the word different, you cannot properly analyze the Crucible without the word hysteria. I don't often use the word wrong because in English there's not really right and wrong, just more soundly or more poorly constructed arguments. But if you write a Crucible essay without using the word hysteria, you are actually just wrong. So get it in there.
All it takes to be condemned
Anyone breathe a word, and I will come to you in the black of some terrible night, and I will bring with me a pointy reckoning that will shudder you.
is to be accused.
I saw Bridget Bishop with the devil. I saw Penny Osborne with the devil.
Onto motivation and behavior, which kind of ties together with the individual and collective I mentioned previously. The Crucible is really a play about individual motivations manifesting into collective behavior, that behavior being hysteria. So the individual motivations you could be looking at is Abigail's lust and unrequited feelings for Proctor, which was my sentence before without the word obvious, because it was true, just not obvious. Mrs. Putnam losing many children and blaming that on witchcraft, which is used as a foreshadow for witchcraft being the basis of the madness that is about to ensue. The personal discontentment of Reverend Paris and his past conflict with Proctor, as well as the land disputes between Giles Corey and Mr. Putnam, all of which lay the groundwork for the hidden resentment and duplicitous desires that eventually descend into wild accusation when given the platform to do so. When it comes to behavior, you could focus on the individual behavior as well. Most of your quotes will do that, but try to find some place in your body paragraphs for the collective behaviors of accusation, misdirection, and concealment, all of which are done by more than one person, even though they might be done by one person at a time. But try to think of the collective impact of how and why they are done by multiple people and the effect that this leads to. On to the last three, anomaly, paradox, and inconsistency. The anomaly is again Proctor, for being just about the only pillar of good sense, despite hiding a massive secret himself in this town given in to rumors and chaos. The paradox is a little harder, as is fitting for the hardest term out of the 7. But in the Crucible, I think you have two options to go for paradox. One being the ironic nature of such vehement insistence on holiness and puritanism and reliance on good while committing so many acts of evil. and that is collectively as a town, not just Abigail and the girls. Or you can go for the evidence in the trials itself, where Danforth refers to witchcraft's invisible nature. That means he is trying to convict people on something that is not only unsubstantiated, but unsubstantiatable. That is not a real English word. The paradox being, if they are guilty of something with an invisible nature, then shouldn't they be cleared because you can't establish they are carrying that quality? And finally, inconsistencies come down to Proctor as well. Shock horror, he is the protagonist, most things come down to him. There are different layers of inconsistencies that you can talk about, such as his internal conflicts of guilt over Abigail, but also shame at having to conceal his past activities, or his relative inaction, again out of fear, for the majority of the play compared to his resoluteness at having finally found his goodness at the play's conclusion. Or if you want to move away from Proctor, you can talk about the inconsistencies of the trials process of the town, where initially it was more suspicion and investigation, but as the hysteria picked up pace, it gave way to the weight of theatrics, coercion, and manipulative momentum. That's about all I have. No thematic breakdowns this time because A, you can find them on the internet, and B, I'm sure you have all your themes locked in for now, so these are kind of final refinement tips on how to make your essays just a little bit more elevated above your peers by addressing all the key things that NESA wants you to consider. And again, if your school text is not the Crucible, I still highly recommend you just draw up a one-page table in your notebook with individual, collective, behavior, motivation, anomaly, paradox, and inconsistency in the left column, and on the right column, where in your text these particular elements are manifested. And I assure you, if you think hard enough, you will be able to find all of them in your assigned text. That being said, if you are not sure how any one of these terms are present in your particularly assigned school text, please leave a comment below, like I keep asking, and I will get to doing my job, which is a tutor, and give you some specific advice and information. That's it for my poor teaching. Thank you for watching. See you in a few days for some poor tech. Until then, keep learning and take care.